Princess Elena stood before the tall mirror in her private chambers, adjusting the heavy golden crown that had belonged to her grandmother. At 17, she was still growing into the weight of royal responsibility, but today felt different. Today marked exactly 1 year since her parents had died in the terrible carriage accident that changed everything. The morning sun streamed through the crystal windows of Rosewood Palace, casting dancing rainbows across the marble floors. Elena had always loved this time of day when the palace was quiet and she could pretend, just for a moment, that she was still the carefree girl who once ran barefoot through the royal gardens. Her lady-in-waiting, Margaret, knocked softly on the door. "Your Highness, the council meeting begins in 30 minutes. Lord Chancellor wants to discuss the trade agreements with the northern kingdoms." Elena sighed deeply. These endless meetings about grain imports and tax collections made her head spin. She much preferred her secret visits to the village orphanage, where she could read stories to children and help serve warm soup. Nobody there called her Your Highness, or expected her to make decisions that affected thousands of people. She walked to her writing desk and picked up a letter that had arrived that morning. The royal seal was unfamiliar, bearing the crest of a distant kingdom called Meridia. Inside, written in elegant handwriting, was a formal request for her hand in marriage from Prince Alexander of Meridia. Elena had never met this prince, but according to the letter, their marriage would create a powerful alliance between their kingdoms. The crown suddenly felt unbearably heavy. Elena reached up to adjust it, but her hands were trembling slightly. Marriage to a stranger, more council meetings, more responsibilities, she wasn't sure she could handle. The weight of the crown seemed to press down on her shoulders like a burden she could never escape. Margaret entered the room carrying Elena's breakfast on a silver tray. "Your Highness, you haven't touched your food. You need to keep your strength up." Elena tried to smile, but it felt forced. "I'm not very hungry this morning, Margaret. Tell me, do you think I'm ready to rule a kingdom?" The older woman set down the tray and looked at Elena with kind eyes. "Your Highness, your parents were very proud of the young woman you've become. You have their compassion and your grandmother's wisdom. But even the strongest rulers need time to learn. What if I make the wrong decisions? What if the people suffer because I don't know enough about trade agreements or military strategies?" Margaret moved closer and gently touched Elena's shoulder. "Every ruler faces these fears, Your Highness. But you have good advisors, and most importantly, you have a heart that truly cares about your people. That matters more than knowing every detail about grain prices." Elena walked to the window and looked down at the bustling courtyard below. Servants hurried back and forth, preparing for the day's activities. Guards marched in formation, their armor gleaming in the sunlight. Everyone seemed to know their place and purpose, while she felt lost in a role she never expected to fill so young. A commotion in the courtyard caught her attention. A group of riders was approaching the main gate, their horses foaming from what appeared to be a long, hard journey. The lead rider carried a banner she didn't recognize, deep blue with silver stars. As they drew closer, Elena could see that the riders wore fine clothes beneath their travel cloaks. "Margaret, who do you think those visitors might be?" The lady-in-waiting joined her at the window. "I'm not certain, Your Highness, but they appear to be nobility from another kingdom. Perhaps they're here for the summer festival." 40 far. Elena had forgotten about the festival. In 3 days, Rosewood would host its annual celebration, drawing visitors from neighboring kingdoms. There would be dancing, music, and feasting in the Great Hall. Under normal circumstances, Elena would have been excited. But this year, the festival felt like another obligation, another performance where she had to pretend to be confident and royal. She turned back to the mirror and once again adjusted the crown. Her reflection looked back at her. A young woman trying to fill a role that seemed too large. The crown, with its intricate gold work and precious gems, had been crafted for queens who ruled with absolute confidence. Elena wondered if she would ever feel worthy of wearing it. "Your Highness, shall I tell the council you'll be slightly delayed?" Elena shook her head. "No. I need to face these responsibilities. Help me choose a dress that makes me look more queenly." Margaret smiled and moved to the large wardrobe filled with gowns in every color imaginable. She selected a deep emerald dress with gold embroidery that complemented Elena's dark hair and brown eyes. As Elena changed into the formal dress, she tried to push away her doubts and focus on the day ahead. The council chamber was already filled with older men when Elena entered. They all stood and bowed as she took her place at the head of the long oak table. Lord Chancellor, a thin man with silver hair, spread several documents before her. Your Highness, we must discuss the grain shortage in the eastern provinces. The harvest was poor this year, and we need to decide whether to reduce taxes or purchase grain from neighboring kingdoms. Elena studied the papers, trying to understand the numbers and projections. Everything seemed so complicated, with multiple factors affecting each decision. She found herself missing her father's calm presence and her mother's gentle guidance during difficult choices. As the meeting continued, Elena's mind wandered to the marriage proposal sitting on her desk. Prince Alexander of Meridia was reportedly handsome, educated, and well-respected in his kingdom. The alliance would bring military protection and trade opportunities that could help solve some of their economic problems. But the thought of marrying someone she had never met, someone who might not understand her dreams of helping orphaned children or her love of simple pleasures, filled her with dread. The afternoon passed slowly with discussions about road repairs, tax collection, and preparations for the summer festival. Elena tried to contribute meaningful questions and suggestions, but she often felt out of her depth. The advisors were patient and respectful, but she could sense their concern about her inexperience. When the meeting finally ended, Elena returned to her chambers, feeling drained and overwhelmed. The crown, which she had worn throughout the long afternoon, felt heavier than ever. She stood before the mirror again, looking at her reflection and wondering if she would ever feel comfortable in this role. Margaret brought dinner on a tray, along with another letter that had arrived during the afternoon. This one bore the royal seal of Meridia, and Elena's heart sank as she realized it was probably more details about the marriage proposal. She opened the letter carefully and read the formal language requesting her response within 1 month. Prince Alexander wrote that he was eager to meet her and hoped their union would bring prosperity to both kingdoms. His words were polite but distant, revealing nothing about his personality or interests. Elena set the letter aside and tried to eat, but the food tasted like dust in her mouth. Through her window, she could see the last rays of sunlight, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. In the village below, families were gathering for their evening meals, sharing stories of their day and planning for tomorrow. Their lives seemed so much simpler, so much more genuine than the formal world of royal duty. As night fell, Elena prepared for bed but found herself unable to sleep. The crown sat on its special stand beside her bed, catching the moonlight that streamed through her window. Tomorrow would bring more meetings, more decisions, and more reminders of how unprepared she felt for the enormous responsibility that had fallen on her young shoulders. The second day brought unexpected challenges that tested Elena's growing confidence as a ruler. She woke before dawn, determined to visit the village orphanage before her royal duties began. Disguising herself in a simple brown cloak, she slipped out of the palace through a hidden passage she had discovered as a child. The orphanage sat on the edge of the village, a humble stone building that housed 23 children whose parents had died in various tragedies. Elena had been secretly supporting the orphanage for months, using her personal allowance to provide food, clothing, and books. The children knew her only as Elena, a kind young woman who told wonderful stories and always brought fresh bread from the palace kitchens. When she arrived, the children rushed to greet her with excited shouts and warm hugs. Little Thomas, who was only 5 years old, tugged on her cloak and asked, "Elena, will you tell us about the princess and the magic garden today?" Elena laughed and gathered the children around her in the main room. As she began weaving a tale about a brave princess who used her garden's magic flowers to heal her kingdom's troubles, she felt more at peace than she had in months. Here, she wasn't weighed down by crowns or formal dress. Here, she could simply be herself. Mrs. Dorothy, the elderly woman who ran the orphanage, pulled Elena aside after story time. "My dear, you look troubled this morning. Is everything well with you?" Elena hesitated, wanting desperately to share her worries but knowing she couldn't reveal her true identity. "I'm facing some difficult decisions, Mrs. Dorothy. Sometimes I feel like I'm not ready for the responsibilities in my life." The wise old woman smiled and patted Elena's hand. Child, none of us ever feel truly ready for life's biggest challenges. But you have a good heart and a clever mind. Trust yourself, and remember that asking for help isn't a sign of weakness. Elena returned to the palace just as the morning council session was beginning. She quickly changed into her royal dress and placed the heavy crown on her head, transforming once again from simple Elena into Princess Elena, ruler of Rosewood. The morning brought news that made her stomach flutter with anxiety. Lord Chancellor announced that Prince Alexander of Meridia had decided to visit Rosewood personally to meet her before their potential engagement was finalized. He would arrive the following evening, just in time for the summer festival. Your Highness, Lord Chancellor explained, this visit presents both an opportunity and a challenge. If Prince Alexander approves of the match, our kingdoms will benefit greatly from the alliance. However, you must be prepared to make a final decision about the marriage proposal. Elena nodded, trying to appear calm while her mind raced with questions. What if Prince Alexander was arrogant or cruel? What if they had nothing in common? What if he expected her to abandon her charitable work with the orphans and focus only on royal ceremonies? The rest of the morning was spent in preparation for the prince's visit. The palace staff worked frantically to ensure everything would be perfect. Fresh flowers were arranged in every room. The silver was polished until it gleamed, and the kitchen staff planned elaborate menus for the welcome feast. Elena found herself caught between excitement and dread. Part of her was curious about Prince Alexander. According to reports, he was 22 years old, well-educated, and respected by his people. He had traveled extensively and was said to be interested in books and music, but reports could be misleading, and Elena worried that his interest in marriage was purely political. During the afternoon, Elena decided to practice her formal presentation in the throne room. She wanted to ensure she would appear confident and regal when meeting Prince Alexander. Margaret helped her rehearse the proper greetings, curtsies, and formal language appropriate for receiving foreign royalty. As Elena practiced walking gracefully while wearing the heavy crown, she began to feel more comfortable with its weight. She discovered that if she held her shoulders straight and kept her chin level, the crown felt more like a natural part of her appearance, rather than an unwieldy burden. Your Highness, you're beginning to look every inch the queen, Margaret observed with approval. Your parents would be proud to see how you've grown into your role. The afternoon also brought a pleasant surprise. Elena received a letter from her cousin Catherine, who lived in the capital city and had recently married a duke she genuinely loved. Catherine's letter was full of encouragement and practical advice about meeting potential suitors. Remember, dear Elena, Catherine had written, that marriage should be based on mutual respect and genuine affection, not just political advantage. Don't be afraid to ask Prince Alexander about his interests, his dreams, and his vision for ruling. A good partner will welcome your questions and share his thoughts openly. Elena tucked the letter into her writing desk, grateful for her cousin's wisdom. She decided that when she met Prince Alexander, she would be honest about her own interests and goals as a ruler. If he couldn't accept her commitment to helping orphaned children and improving life for common people, then he wouldn't be the right partner for her, regardless of the political benefits. The evening brought another challenge that tested Elena's diplomatic skills. A dispute arose between two noble families over water rights to a stream that bordered their properties. Both families had valid historical claims, and the argument had grown heated enough to threaten the peace in that region. Elena listened carefully to both sides, studying maps and reviewing ancient property documents. The solution she proposed surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of choosing one family over the other, she suggested that both families work together to build a system of channels that would provide adequate water for both properties, while also creating a reservoir that could benefit the entire region during dry seasons. Your Highness, said Lord Garrett, one of the disputing nobles, that's a remarkably creative solution. It would require cooperation and shared expense, but it could benefit everyone in the long term. Both families agreed to try Elena's proposal, and she felt a surge of confidence in her ability to find solutions that served everyone's interests. Perhaps she was more ready for royal responsibilities than she had thought. As night fell, Elena stood on her balcony looking out over the kingdom she was learning to rule. The village lights twinkled like earthbound stars, and she could hear faint music drifting up from the taverns where people gathered to celebrate the approaching festival. Tomorrow would bring Prince Alexander's arrival, and the most important decision of her young life. Elena touched the crown that still rested on her head, and realized that it no longer felt quite so heavy. She was beginning to understand that being a good ruler meant more than knowing every detail about trade agreements and tax policies. It meant caring about people, listening to different perspectives, and having the courage to make difficult decisions. She thought about the children at the orphanage, who looked up to her with such trust and affection. She thought about the noble families who had accepted her creative solution to their dispute. She thought about Margaret's loyalty and Mrs. Dorothy's wisdom. All of these people believed in her ability to make a positive difference in their lives. As Elena prepared for bed, she made a silent promise to herself. Whatever happened with Prince Alexander, she would remain true to her own values and continue working to improve life for all her people. The crown might have been made for queens of the past, but she was learning to make it her own. The third day dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for Prince Alexander's arrival and the summer festival that would begin that evening. Elena woke early, her stomach filled with nervous butterflies, as she prepared for the most important day of her young reign. She spent extra time getting ready, choosing a stunning sapphire blue gown that made her dark eyes sparkle. Margaret helped arrange her hair in an elegant style that would showcase the crown without overwhelming Elena's delicate features. As they worked together, Elena found herself thinking about all the advice she had received from Catherine, Mrs. Dorothy, and her loyal servants. "Your Highness, you look absolutely radiant," Margaret said, as she made final adjustments to Elena's appearance. "Prince Alexander will be impressed not just by your beauty, but by the confidence you've gained these past few days." Elena studied herself in the mirror and was surprised to see that Margaret was right. The young woman looking back at her appeared poised and regal, no longer the uncertain girl who had struggled with the crown's weight just days before. She had learned to carry herself with dignity while remaining true to her compassionate nature. The morning was filled with final preparations for the prince's arrival. Elena reviewed the schedule with Lord Chancellor, ensuring that everything would proceed smoothly. There would be a formal greeting ceremony in the afternoon, followed by a private audience where she and Prince Alexander could speak freely. Then the evening would bring the opening celebration of the summer festival. Just before noon, Elena decided to make one last visit to the orphanage. She needed to see the children and draw strength from their innocent joy before facing the formal challenges of the day. Disguising herself once more in her simple brown cloak, she hurried through the village streets. At the orphanage, she found the children practicing a special dance they had learned for the festival. Little Thomas ran to greet her with his usual enthusiasm, followed by the other children who always seemed to sense when she needed their cheerful company. "Elena, Elena," called Mary, a 10-year-old girl with curly red hair. "Come see our festival dance. Mrs. Dorothy taught us the steps, and we're going to perform in the village square tonight." Elena watched with delight as the children demonstrated their dance, their faces glowing with excitement. Their joy was infectious, and she found herself laughing and clapping along with their music. For these precious moments, she forgot about crown ceremonies and marriage proposals, and simply enjoyed being surrounded by genuine affection. Mrs. Dorothy noticed Elena's nervous energy and pulled her aside. "My dear child, you seem particularly anxious today. Is there anything I can do to help?" Elena wished desperately that she could reveal her true identity and ask for advice about meeting Prince Alexander. Instead, she simply said, "I'm facing a very important decision today, Mrs. Dorothy. I'm not sure I'll make the right choice." The elderly woman smiled with understanding. "When I was your age, I had to make a choice between marrying a wealthy man my family preferred and following my heart to marry the village baker I truly loved. I chose love, and though we never had much money, we had 40 wonderful years together before he passed away." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. "Do you ever regret your choice?" "Never, Mrs. Dorothy said firmly. "Money and status can disappear, child. But genuine love and respect last forever. Trust your heart, but also use your head. The right person will appreciate all of who you are, not just the parts that benefit them." 2. Elena hugged Mrs. Dorothy gratefully and promised to return soon with more books for the children. As she hurried back to the palace, she carried the woman's wise words in her heart. Prince Alexander arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, accompanied by a small but impressive entourage. Elena watched from her window as his carriage approached the palace gates. Her first glimpse of the prince surprised her. He was tall and handsome as reported, but there was something approachable about his manner as he helped an elderly servant down from one of the carriages. The formal greeting ceremony took place in the palace's grand courtyard. Elena stood at the top of the marble steps, wearing her crown and finest gown, surrounded by her advisors and nobles. As Prince Alexander approached and bowed formally, she noticed that his smile seemed genuine rather than merely polite. "Your Highness," he said in a pleasant voice, "I am honored to visit your beautiful kingdom and meet the remarkable young woman I have heard so much about." Elena curtsied gracefully and replied with the formal words she had practiced. But as she looked into Prince Alexander's kind blue eyes, she sensed that he might be as nervous about this meeting as she was. The private audience that followed took place in Elena's favorite sitting room, a cozy space filled with comfortable chairs and shelves of beloved books. She had chosen this room deliberately, hoping that the informal atmosphere would encourage honest conversation. As they settled into chairs facing each other, Prince Alexander surprised her by saying, "Your Highness, may I speak frankly? This formal courting process feels rather strange to both of us, I imagine. Would you be willing to have a genuine conversation about our hopes and concerns?" Elena felt a rush of relief. "I would like that very much, Prince Alexander. To be honest, the idea of marrying someone I've never met has been quite frightening. Please, call me Alexander," he said with a warm smile. "And may I say that your honesty is refreshing? Many nobles I meet seem more interested in saying what they think I want to hear, rather than expressing their true thoughts." They talked for over an hour, and Elena was pleasantly surprised by Alexander's intelligence and genuine curiosity about her kingdom. He asked thoughtful questions about her goals as a ruler, and listened intently when she described her work with orphaned children and her desire to improve living conditions for common people. "You know," Alexander said, "I've been involved in similar charitable work in my own kingdom. I believe that royalty has a responsibility to serve all people, not just the wealthy and powerful." Elena felt her heart lift. Here was someone who might actually understand her values and support her dreams. As their conversation continued, Elena found herself relaxing completely. Alexander had a good sense of humor and seemed genuinely interested in learning about her personality beyond her royal title. He shared stories of his travels and his efforts to improve education in rural areas of his kingdom. "I must ask you something important," Elena said as their formal meeting time was drawing to a close. "If we were to marry, would you expect me to abandon my charitable work and focus only on traditional royal duties?" Alexander's expression grew serious. "Absolutely not. In fact, I would hope we could work together to expand such efforts. I believe the strongest kingdoms are those where rulers genuinely care about all their people's welfare." When it came time to prepare for the festival, Elena felt cautiously optimistic about Prince Alexander. He seemed to be everything she could hope for in a potential partner. Intelligent, kind, respectful, and committed to using royal power responsibly. The summer festival began at sunset with a grand feast in the palace's great hall. Elena wore her crown throughout the evening, but it no longer felt heavy or burdensome. She was beginning to understand that the crown represented not just power and responsibility, but also the opportunity to make a positive difference in many lives. As the evening progressed, Elena and Alexander danced together several times. They talked easily, laughing at shared jokes and discovering common interests in books, music, and their dreams for their respective kingdoms. Elena found herself genuinely enjoying his company and imagining what it might be like to rule alongside someone who shared her values. The festival continued outside in the village square, where the orphaned children performed their dance to delighted applause from the gathered crowd. Elena watched proudly as little Thomas and Mary executed their steps perfectly, their faces glowing with joy under the lantern light. "Those children seem very special to you," Alexander observed, noticing Elena's emotional response to the performance. Elena realized this was a perfect opportunity to test whether Alexander would accept all aspects of her life. They are special to me. I've been secretly supporting their orphanage and visiting them regularly. It's one of the most important things I do as their princess. Alexander's face lit up with admiration. That's wonderful. Would you be willing to introduce me to them sometime? I'd love to hear their stories and perhaps discuss ways our kingdoms could work together to help children in similar situations. Elena felt her heart soar. Here was confirmation that Alexander not only accepted her charitable work, but wanted to support and expand it. As the evening wound down and the last of the festival performers took their bows, Elena realized that her fears about marriage and royal responsibility had been largely unfounded. She had found a potential partner who respected her intelligence, supported her goals, and seemed to genuinely care about the welfare of all people in both their kingdoms. Standing beside Alexander as they watched the final fireworks light up the night sky, Elena touched her crown one last time. It no longer felt like a burden she had inherited from her grandmother. Instead, it felt like a tool she could use, possibly alongside a worthy partner, to create positive change in the world. The crown had finally found its proper place on her head, and Elena had finally found her confidence as both a ruler and a young woman, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring.